Believe it or not, there's a there's normally a polling research center for just about everything underneath the sun. Especially in America, we like to know about everything. And I found that there's a National Center for Fathering, believe it or not, in the United States. And they do polling every year. And one of the things that they do is they send out to over a few 100,000 schools an essay. And they ask elementary age school kids to write an essay about this question: what my father means to me. And one year they had over 100,000 submissions of different essays of what their fathers mean to them. And I wanted to read for you just a couple of little excerpts of some of the kids and what they wrote about their dads. You know, our kids, you really never know what they're going to say. And as a dad, you're always hoping for the best and expecting the best, but not always getting the best. But here are some of the essays that were written. From a first grader, it said, "My dad is the best dad ever. I would kiss a pig for him." Pretty good. Another first grader said, "My dad is the Frito-Lay man. That is an important job because Frito-Lay means chips, which is food. That is so important because you couldn't live without food. You can't live without my dad." That's right. Pretty good. Third grader said, "My dad in my life isn't really my dad. It's my grandpa. But he's like a dad to me before I was born. I hope that as I get older, Grandpa will teach me all the stuff that he knows about wood and first aid and everything else he knows about. My grandpa isn't my father, but I wouldn't trade him for all the dads in the world." And that hits some of our people, right? Some of our kids, they don't always have a dad around, but they have other people that are really important to them. Fourth grader says, sometimes as a joke, I'll put my stinky socks in my dad's briefcase. So at work the next day, he will think of me. He's always at the concerts and plays that I'm in, even though he lives about an hour away. It's pretty good, right? Fifth grader said, "You know what else my dad does? He braids my hair. I'm the only girl I know whose dad braids her hair. I think that it's a perfect dad. He's already the world's greatest dad to me. I just wanted everybody else to know that." And finally, a sixth grader wrote, "One time I had an assembly, and I was a soloist, and my dad was on the first row. And after my song, I smiled at my dad, and he smiled back, and he started crying. That was the best thing I ever saw." We need to understand that dads are such a pivotal and important part of our world. In a society today that downplays the idea of a dad and is trying to tell us that dads are not always necessary and it's not the most important thing. And so many times we look at a lot of the ills of society today and it comes from the lack of dads. Several years ago, one of the institutions that holds the criminals in a high max prison decided they wanted to try to do a project to see what would happen. And a week before Mother's Day, they brought in a ton of Mother's Day cards and set up a whole shop and allowed all the inmates to go and pick a card and mail out a card to their moms. The entire room was completely cleared out. There was not a single card left. It went so well that they thought, we should do this for dads too, and they filled up the room again, and no one took a card. And no cards were mailed to dads. And unfortunately, the statistic is that the large majority of people who are incarcerated in male prisons do not have relationships with their father for whatever reason. So as today, as we take and we celebrate the idea of dads, and many of us are fathers here, and many of us And many of you all that maybe you're not a father, you're fulfilling a father's role for some young people. You need to understand that you have incredible amounts of value. And I wanted to take just a few minutes this morning to look into Mark chapter 5 and to see an example of what a really good dad is. See, in Mark chapter 5, some things have occurred that have changed life for a family. In Mark chapter 5, we have a situation to where we have a dad who has a need. And one of the first things that Mark in this chapter teaches us is that in fatherhood, our career and our social status does not and should not come before our children. There are so many times that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make in our society today is that we put our work over our children. We put what people are going to think about us and the way that our family is over our children. We call for them to live in such a ways that are not livable. We want everyone to see us in a certain light, and we miss sometimes what it is to be a really good dad. In Mark 5, starting in verse 21 through 23, it says, when Jesus had again crossed over by the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. And one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she'll be healed and live. And here you have a situation where this is a man who is high up in the community. He has helped running the church that so many are trying to trick Jesus into being punished because he's teaching a different message than the church. He is in the leadership. He is one of the ones guiding the community. He has all the social privilege. He's got the right job for the community. But he's got a problem. He's got a little girl who's really sick. And no amount of money that he's made through the church and no amount of clout that he has in the community is getting her any better. There's no medicine that's been done. There's no prayers that have worked. There's nothing that is getting his little girl any better. And I can tell you there's nothing more painful in this world than as a parent watching your child suffer. And the fear that they may not be able to make it through will drive you to do anything to save that child. And a good dad doesn't allow social statuses and business to come before his children, and Jairus didn't either. In the midst of everyone, the huge crowd there, Jairus comes and falls at Jesus' feet, and he begs him, please help my little girl. All I need you to do is help my little girl. And he comes to my second point. Fathers put the needs of their children over their own desires and their own comfort. As a father, if we're going to be really good dads, we make the sacrifices for our children. I hate to tell you, fathering is not convenient. Being a dad means sacrificing sometimes. And your desires and the things that you want to do are not always what gets done. From the littlest, smallest things of Saturdays watching hours of mind-numbing cartoons, which you have no desire to do. Sitting out and watching ball games with children that have no talent compared to your own child. And sweating for hours. Driving countless miles, spending countless dollars listening to the beginnings of them learning how to play an instrument, trying to hear pitch for the first time, all the different things come along with that. The drawings on the walls, the holes in the walls, the countless times you bought more clothes when yours are looking kind of ragged. It's what we do as dads. We put our needs of our children before we put our own desires, and so did Jairus as he positioned himself. In Psalms 130:13, it says, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. It is our job as fathers to love and have compassion, to take care of our children. As we look at Jairus and his story, it makes me think, well, what does that look like in modern day? And the best example I can show you of what it is to an extreme is the Hoyt family. And I wanted to share just a short video with you about a father and a son in the Hoyt family. Rick and Dick work together. What would you do as a father for your child? I can only imagine that feeling the first day. I loved it. It said his dad didn't run, but his son said, I want to do this. And for the first time in his son's life, he felt what it was like to not be restricted, to not be held back, to not feel less than what he was meant to be. And it wasn't a one-time trip. Thousands of miles later, not only do they run, but now they do triathlons. Do things that they can never even think or imagine because of a love of a father for his son. And as we go through the story of Mark, we see that Jairus comes and he asks Jesus, help me with my daughter, and Jesus agrees. And while they're going, Jesus gets stopped by somebody else. And he goes on and he helps that person in need. In the midst of it, we run into the situation now as Jesus is finishing up with another woman in need. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came to the house from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why do you bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, don't be afraid, just believe. Can you imagine that conversation? You've done everything in your power to protect and to give to that child. You've gone to the extremes to try to save that child, only to hear that it was for nothing. Only to hear that just leave him alone, it's too late. But Jesus tells him it's not too late. Just believe. Which comes to our third point. Faithfulness of a father is life-changing to their families. Our faithfulness as fathers changes the world that we live in. Our faithfulness can save and give opportunities for our children to know the Lord. See, we're at a real pivotal point right here in the story. Because Jesus says you just need to believe. And Jairus can walk away with his head hung down low, crying and weeping, frustrated at the Lord because he didn't go when he asked him to go. He could have played the blame game. He could have asked Jesus, why didn't you go? If you would have just went when I asked. Why is she more important than my child? I'm a synagogue ruler, and she was a nobody. Why did you save her at the end of her life when my daughter was at the beginning of hers? He could have done all those things. He could have questioned what Jesus was doing. Or he can believe in the power of Jesus Christ. And he chooses to believe. And because of that, as we follow on in Scripture, it says he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took his child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went where the child was. And I want to stop right there. You have a room full of people, oh, it's so horrible. This is the worst day ever. I can't believe this would have happened to Jairus. And Jesus makes one comment, and what are they doing? He's an idiot. Were they crying for that child? Were they wailing in disbelief for that child? Or were they positioning themselves the way that they're supposed to look? Because it's Jairus' house. And it's Jairus' child. Who in the room loves Jairus and his daughter? Is it all those wailing and crying? Is it all the friends and the neighbors? Or is it the Lord? He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. And I want you to understand that in the midst of it, in our world sometimes as fathers, there are a lot of people that are going to give us a lot of advice. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be there for us, to tell us how it is. And there's a lot of people that are going to act the way the society tells them to act. But when the rubber meets the road, our Savior is the only thing that's going to be life-changing to our children. It's not their select teams that they're on. It's not their special coaches for singing or dancing. It's not the outfit from the right store. It's not the iPhone that you got them. I hate to tell you, it's not if they're valedictorian or what scholarship they got. As a father, the greatest gift that we can give to our children is a faith and a belief in Jesus Christ. And we allow Him to work in us and through our children to change their lives. I can tell you when I read this, it hits me hard when I say she was 12 years old, because I've got two 12-year-olds in that back row. And I know right now they are in the midst of changing their world. They're not little babies anymore, and they're not grown-ups. They're right at that perfect point where everything is transitioning. And they're making